Hello and welcome to today's video. Today's video is on the topic of why you shouldn't be slut shaming and why you shouldn't be publicly enjoying watching women lose. The reason I'm doing this video is there are lots of women who are incredibly popular, especially on the Sensible Centre, who often slag off other women. And their predominantly male audiences lap this up. I hope that by the end of this video I've explained why this is a problem. Firstly, slagging women off online shows weakness. This weakness is to a lesser extent if it's women doing it. However, normally when women do it, men pile in too. The reason slagging women off in public makes you look weak is it comes across as incredibly petty and childish, especially if you're a man. Even if you're a woman, it comes off as petty and childish. But more importantly, from the male point of view, it looks spiteful, and it's very easy for your political positions to be strawmanned if you behave like them, and your character strawmanned. If you're constantly slagging women off online and retweeting a video of a woman who has very liberal sexual attitudes crying because she can't get a husband and saying she deserves it, it's very spiteful and generally quite repulsive to people. Even though I might agree with certain things that people say, if it's phrased in a very spiteful way, I will generally be quite repulsed by it. It's also distasteful. So what I mean by distasteful is it's not polite and it's not necessary. Generally, as a general rule, especially if you're a public figure or you in any way represent an organisation or political movement, you should be as polite as possible. This does not mean that you have to treat your political enemies kindly. However, being polite stops you from encountering unnecessary obstacles when you're discussing politics. For example, if you're very rude to someone online, they can report you for cyberbullying and you can lose your account. Or they can even, in some countries, report you to the police for harassment. And there's no point getting arrested or losing your Twitter account or whatever social media you use just because you wanted to dunk on a woman who you have a visceral reaction to for whatever reason. It might be because she's very liberal and has very liberal sexual values and sexual ethics. That might create a visceral reaction in you, and dunking on her might make you feel better in the short term. But the issue is, and the main issue here is, I don't think you should allow yourself to get emotionally involved and feel strong emotions towards your political enemies, because what that does is it allows them to bait you into wasting your time and getting yourself into trouble by saying stupid things online. Another problem I have with slagging off women who have very liberal sexual ethics is these women can be useful. I'm not saying they'd make good wives or girlfriends, but these women, especially ones who are very sexually liberal in terms of ethics, they have their uses. For example, a woman who has very liberal sexual ethics, let's say a prostitute for example, can be very good at testing whether someone's got a big mouth or not. What I mean by this is there's a commercial practice that happens in certain industries where secrecy and confidence is of the utmost importance. Hookers are often hired to try to be into someone's employees and try and get information out of them. This works because most men will say things to women and can be convinced by women to say things that they shouldn't in a way that men can't. So I call it the hooker test, but it's basically a who's got a big mouth test, and promiscuous women and women who are very sexually liberal are very useful for conducting those types of tests. Rewards. Sexually liberal women can be very useful in terms of reward. What I mean by reward is I don't mean selling a prostitute into sex slavery. No, that would be illegal, and I also have moral objections to that. But what I mean is, in terms of reward, these women who are more sexually promiscuous, basically display the reward that people get, or especially women get, for having particularly liberal sexual ethics. What happens a lot is these women are used as poster girls of what not to do for right-wing women. But the issue with that is it's not as effective as getting these women to explain their rewards in a way that would agree with your worldview. So if you want women to have better, more conservative sexual ethics, having someone who is maybe a former prostitute, maybe a former porn star, saying, I really regret what I did because it now makes it very difficult for me to have a family, and that woman being well received and given a degree of sympathy, or at least indifference, that's a much more powerful message than, let's face it, men who seem to be either incels or low-value men dunking on the former sex worker who's very regretful of her career choices. And it's a much more effective way to have someone who's been there, done that, explain why what they did was wrong and they shouldn't have done it, as opposed to someone dunking on them, because what that does is it reinforces any sexually liberal narratives to an extent. Because if you have someone who is regretting their choices and they're well received and with atonement forgiven in a sort of way, that's a much more effective way of encouraging people to atone instead of people being bullied on the internet or being dunked on on the internet. Another thing promiscuous women are extremely good for is ruining the lives of your political enemies. So if you have promiscuous women and your enemies are sex addicts and whatever, porn addicts, the fact that these women exist is very good for the Sensible Centre, because what the Sensible Centre can do is allow these women who have particularly liberal sexual ethics to ruin the lives of your political enemies. Thank you very much for watching. Please check out my public speaking locals channel, which is Open Oratory, and feel free to check out my Substack and Twitter. My Substack, I focus on legal and political strategy.